There's a secret hidden for 2,000 years, concealed in a single number, a code that the first Christians deciphered immediately, but was lost in time. Today, this number has become synonymous with terror, horror movies, cheap superstition. But what if I told you that you never knew what it really means? That the answer has always been there, right in front of your eyes, waiting to be discovered? Stay until the end of this video, because what you're about to hear now will completely change the way you see the Bible. Island of Patmos, year 95 after Christ. The Aegean Sea beats violently against the sharp rocks. The wind howls, and in a damp, dark cave, lit only by a faint flickering oil lamp, an old man writes furiously on a worn parchment. His name is John, the last living apostle. He's seen it all. He saw Jesus crucified. He saw his friends martyred one by one. He saw Peter crucified upside down. He saw Paul beheaded. He saw James stoned. And now he himself was exiled to this deserted island, this prison of stone and solitude, precisely because he wouldn't stop talking about Christ. But that night, something happened. He had a vision. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination of old age. It was something so real, so frightening, so intense, that his hands trembled as he tried to put on paper what he was seeing. Beasts, thrones, seals being broken, angels screaming, blood, fire, and in the midst of it all, a number, 666. But John didn't write this number by chance. He wasn't trying to scare anyone. He was trying to protect someone, because at that exact moment, while he was writing these words in the cave of Patmos, Christians were being hunted, tortured, burned alive in the streets of Rome. And the one responsible for all of this had a name that couldn't be spoken aloud, a name that, if discovered in a letter, meant instant death. So John did something ingenious, something the Jews had been doing for centuries. He transformed the name into a number, and he sent this coded message to the persecuted churches, knowing that they, and only they, would understand immediately. But time passed, generations came and went, and the code was forgotten. Today, when someone mentions the number 666, what comes to your mind? Horror movies, the Antichrist, the devil, rebel tattoos, internet jokes, people who avoid this number as if it were cursed. I've seen people refuse license plates, phone numbers, even houses with that number. I've seen mothers making the sign of the cross when seeing 666 written somewhere. But here's the truth nobody tells you. All this fear was constructed. It was fabricated over the centuries by a mixture of ignorance, superstition, and a complete lack of understanding of what John was really saying. Because look, the first Christians weren't afraid of this number. They knew exactly what it meant. And when they read Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, they didn't tremble in fear. They smiled. They smiled because they understood the message. They understood the code. And they understood that John was actually giving them a weapon of resistance. So what happened? How did we lose this? To understand the number 666, you need to understand something called gematria. And no, this isn't occultism. This isn't mystical numerology. This is ancient Jewish mathematics. It's a system the Jews used for millennia, where each letter of the Hebrew alphabet had a numerical value. Aleph was worth 1, Bet was worth 2, Gimel was worth 3, and so on. So any word, any name could be transformed into a number. It was like a secret code embedded in the language itself, and every Jew of that time, including John, knew this system perfectly. Now pay attention to this. Revelation was written in Greek, but John was Jewish. He thought like a Jew. He wrote like a Jew. And when he said in chapter 13, verse 18, "Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. And his number is 666. He was giving a huge clue. Calculate the number. Don't be afraid of it. Don't avoid it. Calculate. Discover, decipher. because 666 wasn't a mystical number, it was someone's name. A name that, when you applied gematria, added up to exactly 666, and that someone was Nero Caesar. Let me take you to Rome. Year 64 after Christ. The city is in flames. Fire devours everything. Houses, temples, people running, screaming, trying to save what they can. The fire lasts 6 days. When it finally goes out, 2/3 of Rome has been destroyed. And who was blamed? Officially, nobody knows. But rumors spread quickly. They say it was the emperor himself, Nero, that he ordered the fire because he wanted to rebuild the city from scratch, with even more grandiose palaces, with his name engraved on every stone. But Nero needed a scapegoat, and he chose the Christians. Suddenly, Christians began to be arrested, dragged out of their homes in the middle of the night, accused of burning Rome, accused of hating humanity, accused of secret rituals and cannibalism because they spoke of eating the body of Christ. And then the terror began. Nero ordered Christians to be covered with animal skins and thrown to ferocious dogs. He ordered hundreds of them to be crucified along the Via Appia. He ordered some to be soaked in pitch, tied to stakes, and their burning bodies used as human torches to illuminate his gardens at night while he strolled, laughing, admiring the decoration. And he didn't do this in hiding. He did it as a public spectacle, as entertainment, as a warning. This was the beast. This was the man John was describing in Revelation. Now comes the ingenious part. John needed to warn the churches about Nero. He needed them to know who the real enemy was. But he couldn't write Nero Caesar directly. If a letter with that name were intercepted by Roman soldiers, it meant certain death for both sender and receiver. So he used the code. He took the name Nero Caesar and wrote it in Hebrew, Neron Caesar. He transliterated it letter by letter, Nun, Resh, Vav, Nun, Kof, Samek, Resh, and he calculated the value of each letter. Nun equals 50, Resh equals 200, Vav equals 6, Nun equals 50, Kof equals 100, Samek equals 60, Resh equals 200. Add it all up. What does it equal? 666. John wasn't talking about a demon. He wasn't prophesying a future Antichrist. He was denouncing in code the tyrant who was massacring Christians at that very moment. And here's the most impressive detail. Some ancient manuscripts of Revelation don't contain the number 6666. They contain 616. Do you know why? Because in Latin, the way to write Nero Caesar was slightly different. Nero Caesar without the final N. And when you calculate that name, it equals exactly 616. This isn't a contradiction. This is confirmation, proof that the first Christians understood the message perfectly. But here's where it gets even deeper. Because yes, John was talking about Nero, but he was also talking about something greater, something timeless. The number 666 in the Bible represents human imperfection trying to pass itself off as divine, because the number 7 is the number of perfection, of God's completeness. God rested on the seventh day. 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and the number 6, it's humanity. Man was created on the 6th day. The number 6 represents the human being in its limitation, in its fragility, in its failed attempt to reach divinity without God. So 666 is the number of man elevated to the maximum. It's man trying to be God. It's man placing himself in God's place. It's human power corrupted, inflated, demanding worship. Nero proclaimed himself a god. He demanded that everyone worship him. He placed his statues in temples. He minted coins with his face and the word divine. He was the personification of 666, but he wasn't the only one, and he won't be the last. Throughout history, we've seen this repeat. Emperors, dictators, leaders who demand absolute loyalty, who silence dissent, who place themselves above morality, above law, above God. Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, each of them in their own way carried the mark of the beast. not on their body, but in their essence. And here we come to the part that scares people the most, the mark of the beast. Revelation 13, verses 16 and 17 says, "It forced all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless they had the mark." Nowadays, conspiracy theories run wild. Subcutaneous chips, vaccines, barcodes, digital currencies, artificial intelligence, any technological advancement is immediately associated with the mark of the beast. But let's go back to the original context. In the Roman Empire, to buy or sell, you needed to participate in commercial activities that involved worship of the emperor. You needed to burn incense before Caesar's statue. You needed to say, "Caesar is Lord." You needed to have coins with his face on them, coins that Christians considered idolatry. If you refused, you were excluded from the market. You couldn't work, you couldn't trade. You and your family would starve to death. This was the mark. It wasn't literal, it was symbolic. It was the choice between worshipping the empire or worshipping Christ, between living comfortably within the system or resisting and suffering the consequences. And guess what? This choice continues to be made today. The mark of the beast isn't a chip. It's conformity. It's the worship of power, money, status, comfort above God. It's saying yes to systems that oppress, that exploit, that destroy, just because it's easier, more profitable, safer. It's choosing the empire instead of the kingdom. So what was John really saying to the persecuted churches? He was saying, don't give up. I know it seems like the empire is invincible. I know Nero seems like a god. I know you're afraid, hungry, hiding, being hunted like animals. But he is only 66666. He is only a man, an imperfect man trying to pass himself off as God. And every empire that rises against God eventually falls. And Nero fell. 4 years after John wrote Revelation, Nero killed himself. His empire collapsed. And those persecuted Christians, those who resisted, who didn't accept the mark, who didn't worship the beast, they won, not with swords, not with violence, but with faithfulness, with love, with hope. And 300 years later, the Roman Empire, the greatest empire the world has ever seen, bowed before Christ. This is the true message of Revelation. It's not a horror book. It's not a manual of enigmatic prophecies about the end of the world. It's a letter of resistance, a letter of hope, a letter saying evil may seem powerful, but it's already defeated. So next time you hear someone talk about 666 with fear, with superstition, with conspiracy theory, remember old John. Remember him in that dark cave in Patmos, writing by the dim light of an oil lamp, trembling not with fear, but with hope. Because he knew something that many have forgotten today. The number of the beast has no power whatsoever over those who bear the name of God. The real battle isn't against numbers. It isn't against technology. It isn't against barcodes or digital currencies. The real battle has always been, and always will be, a battle of loyalty. Who will you serve? At what altar will you bow? What kingdom will you build with your life? Because every day, each of us makes this choice. And every time we choose love instead of hate, every time we choose truth instead of lies, every time we choose justice instead of convenience, every time we choose Christ instead of the empire, we refuse the mark. And this is the secret message of the number 66. It's not a code of terror. It's a code of liberation. If this video touched you, if this made sense to you, leave a comment down below. Tell me, were you ever afraid of this number? And now, after knowing the truth, what has changed? And if you want more content like this, that goes to the root. That shows what the Bible really says without sensationalism, without fear, without manipulation. Subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications, because the truth has always been more powerful than any lie. And remember, you don't need to be afraid of any number. You need to be afraid of living without purpose. Until the next video, and may God bless your journey.